The sun was beginning to dip behind the horizon, casting a warm orange glow over the wide open spaces of the ranch. Cole Martin stood at the edge of the dirt road, his cowboy hat pulled low over his face, shielding him from the harsh rays of the late afternoon sun. He wiped his brow with the back of his hand, sweat dripping down his weathered face. It had been a long day of tending to the cattle, fixing fences and taking care of the chores around the ranch. Life out here on this isolated land was simple and hard. The land didn't care who you were or what you had been through. It only cared that you did your work and did it well. As Cole stood looking out over the open range, a figure appeared in the distance. At first he thought it was a mirage, a trick of the heat rising from the ground. But as the figure grew closer, he could make out a woman walking slowly down the dusty road toward him. She seemed small, almost fragile, and her clothes were torn and dirt-streaked. She looked as if she hadn't slept in days. Her face was hidden beneath a thick curtain of messy hair, and she appeared as though she was struggling to move, as if every step took an enormous amount of energy. Curiosity pulled Cole toward her. He had grown used to the quiet solitude of his ranch life, but even he couldn't ignore the fact that this woman was far from home, far from anywhere. As she got closer, Cole could see the weariness in her eyes, the deep, hollow look of someone who had been through a lot, more than anyone should ever have to endure. She was no stranger to hardship. When she reached the gate, she stopped, her body swaying slightly as if she might fall at any moment. Cole stood there for a moment, unsure of what to say. His instincts told him to approach carefully, but something in the woman's eyes made him want to help, to offer her the kindness that she seemed to be missing. "Can I help you?" Cole called out, his voice gruff but kind. The woman flinched as if she wasn't expecting him to speak. She looked up at him for the first time, her eyes wide with surprise and fear. For a moment, neither of them moved. It was as if they were both measuring each other, wondering what the other would do next. Then slowly she nodded. I need help," she whispered, her voice barely audible, as though speaking any louder might make her vanish into the air. Cole stepped closer, his boots crunching on the gravel beneath his feet. He could see now that she was younger than he'd first thought, maybe in her late 20s. Her clothes were ragged and there were streaks of dirt across her face, but her eyes, those eyes told a different story. They were full of sadness, but also a quiet strength, as if she had been fighting battles for a long time. "Come on up to the house," Cole said gently. "I can get you some food and a place to rest for the night." The woman hesitated, her eyes darting back and forth as though she was weighing her options. There was a brief moment of tension before she nodded once more firmly this time. She took a step forward, then another, her body trembling slightly as she moved toward him. Cole led her up to the porch where he opened the door to his modest but warm home. The inside smelled of wood and leather. Everything about the place spoke of simplicity. A small kitchen, a worn couch, a few pictures of family on the walls. It was nothing fancy, but it was a home. "Sit down here," Cole said, motioning toward the worn armchair near the fireplace. "I'll get you something to eat." The woman sank into the chair with a sigh, her shoulders slumping as if the weight of the world had been lifted off them. Her hands trembled as she held them in her lap, and her eyes darted nervously around the room as though expecting someone to burst through the door at any moment. Cole didn't ask questions. He simply moved to the kitchen and began preparing a simple meal, a bowl of soup, some bread, and a cup of tea. He knew she was hungry, and from the way she had looked earlier, it was likely she hadn't eaten in a long time. When he returned with the food, she barely looked at him. She simply took the bowl and began eating quietly, not speaking, not making any noise other than the occasional sip of tea. Cole watched her from the doorway, giving her space. He could tell she was exhausted, emotionally and physically. He knew it wasn't just hunger that had brought her here. There was something deeper, something that she wasn't yet ready to share. After a while, as she finished her meal, Cole set the empty bowl on the table and sat down across from her. He wasn't sure what to say, but he knew that if she was going to stay, she would need to feel safe. He cleared his throat and spoke again. "You don't have to tell me anything you're not ready to," he said quietly. "But if you want to talk, I'm here. I'll listen." The woman looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and pain. She opened her mouth as though to say something, but no words came out. Instead, she looked away and blinked back the tears that had begun to form in her eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean to be a burden. I didn't know where else to go." Cole's heart softened. He could tell she was battling with herself, torn between trusting him and keeping her guard up. He leaned back in his chair and gave her space to breathe. "You're not a burden," he said with a reassuring smile. "You're welcome here. You don't have to explain anything unless you want to." She nodded, the weight of her past pressing down on her, but for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to relax, if only for a moment. Cole stood up slowly, giving her a final nod before turning toward the door. "I'll get you set up in a room for the night. You can rest, and tomorrow we'll figure out what you need." As he led her down the hallway to a small, comfortable bedroom, he couldn't help but wonder what had brought this woman to his doorstep. But more importantly, he couldn't shake the feeling that her arrival was no accident. Something about her, about the way she carried herself, told him that she had been through a lot, more than most people would ever know. But for now, he would respect her silence. She was here, safe, and that was all that mattered. That night, Sarah lay in the bed Cole had prepared for her, her mind racing with memories of the past. She had come here hoping for a moment of peace, a break from the relentless fear and anxiety that had been her constant companions. But as she drifted off to sleep, one thought lingered in her mind. She had never felt so alone, even though she was no longer on her own. The following morning, the sun was already bright and warm, creeping through the small window in Sarah's room. She blinked as the light stirred her from a restless sleep. The bed beneath her felt soft and comforting, so different from the hard ground she had been sleeping on for weeks. But even though she was physically resting, her mind was still racing, tangled in thoughts of her past. Sarah sat up slowly, rubbing her eyes. She could still hear the faint sound of birds outside and the distant hum of a tractor from the nearby fields. For the first time in a long time, she felt safe. But how long would it last? How long could she stay in this quiet place before her past came crashing back in? She shook her head, trying to push those thoughts away. The past had a way of following you, no matter where you ran. But maybe here, at this ranch with this man who had shown her nothing but kindness, she could breathe for a while. Maybe, just maybe, she could find a way to start over. After a few moments, Sarah stood up, her legs still a little wobbly from the exhaustion she had carried with her for so long. She wrapped a thin blanket around her shoulders and made her way toward the kitchen, where she could smell the faint scent of coffee brewing. Cole was already there, standing at the stove with a cup of coffee in his hand. His broad shoulders and calm demeanor gave him an air of confidence, but there was a kindness in his eyes that she hadn't expected. He looked up as she entered the room, and a small, reassuring smile tugged at the corners of his lips. "Morning," he said, his voice warm and steady. "Morning," Sarah replied softly, though she wasn't sure how to act around him yet. She had never been good at letting people in, and even now, she felt the old walls she had built around herself creeping back up. "I made some breakfast," Cole continued, motioning to a plate of scrambled eggs and toast on the table. "It's not much, but I hope it's enough." Sarah's stomach growled at the sight of the food. She hadn't realized how hungry she was until she saw the plate in front of her. She hesitated for a moment before sitting down. She was still unsure of herself, still afraid of what would happen if she let her guard down too much. "Thank you," she said quietly, taking a fork and picking at the food in front of her. She could feel Cole's gaze on her, but he didn't push her. He simply sat across from her, sipping his coffee and watching the light slowly fill the room. They ate in silence for a few minutes, with Sarah focused on the food and Cole lost in his thoughts. He had been around people his whole life, but something about Sarah made him feel protective in a way he hadn't expected. She was clearly carrying a heavy burden, one that she wasn't ready to share with him yet, and Cole knew that was okay. He would let her come to him when she was ready. When Sarah finished eating, she wiped her mouth with a napkin and set it down on the table. She wasn't used to the peace that seemed to hang in the air here, the quiet moments that felt different from the chaos of her past. She didn't know if she could ever feel truly safe again. But in this house, at least for a moment, it felt like she could breathe. "Is there anything I can do to help around here?" she asked, surprising herself. She had no idea why she said it. It wasn't like her to offer help, especially not after everything she had been through. But the idea of being useful, of not feeling like a burden, seemed like something she needed right now. Cole looked at her, his brow furrowing in thought. He hadn't expected her to ask that, but it was clear that she didn't want to just sit around and do nothing. She was used to being on her own, to handling things by herself. There's always something to do around here, Cole said, his voice light but sincere. If you feel up to it, I could use some help with the garden. The weeds have been getting out of hand and I haven't had time to take care of it. Sarah nodded, feeling a little better. It wasn't much, but it was something. And it would get her outside, away from the silence of the house. She could lose herself in the work, in the rhythm of pulling weeds and planting flowers, and maybe for a little while, she wouldn't think about the darkness that had followed her for so long. The two of them spent the rest of the morning working side by side in the garden. Cole showed Sarah how to pull weeds from around the plants without damaging them, and she tried her best to keep up. The work wasn't hard, but it was quiet and simple. And for Sarah, that was exactly what she needed. As they worked, Sarah found herself starting to relax bit by bit. There was something about the fresh air, the sound of the wind rustling through the trees, and the steady, comforting presence of Cole that made her feel like maybe she could start to let go of some of the pain she had been carrying. But just when she thought she might finally be able to relax, her thoughts began to drift back to the life she had left behind. The memories flooded her mind, uninvited and overwhelming. She thought of the fear, the anger, the sense of being trapped. She thought of the loneliness that had eaten away at her for so long. She stopped for a moment, wiping her forehead with the back of her hand, feeling the heat of the sun on her skin. She had to push those thoughts away, had to focus on the present. This was her chance to move forward. She couldn't let the past control her anymore. Cole, noticing the shift in her demeanor, paused and turned to look at her. "You okay?" he asked, his voice gentle. Sarah quickly nodded, forcing a small smile. "Yeah, just thinking." Cole didn't push. He didn't need to know what was going through her mind right now. He could tell it was a lot, and maybe one day she would be ready to talk about it. For now, he was content to simply be there for her, to offer her this small piece of peace. As the morning slipped into afternoon, the two of them finished their work in the garden. The sense of accomplishment in the air was light, but for Sarah it was more than just the garden that had shifted. There was something about the simplicity of the ranch, the quiet routine of the day that made her feel like she was slowly starting to heal. Maybe this was what she needed. Maybe she could start to believe in something better for herself. By the time they finished, Sarah was exhausted but oddly content. She wiped her hands on her jeans and looked up at Cole, who was standing by the garden gate watching the horizon. There was something peaceful about the way he carried himself, like he wasn't in any hurry, like he didn't have anywhere else to be. It was a stark contrast to the life she had been living. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice softer than it had been before. "For everything." Cole nodded, giving her a warm, easy smile. "You don't have to thank me. We're in this together, okay?" Sarah didn't respond right away. Instead, she simply nodded, a quiet understanding passing between them. For the first time in a long while, Sarah felt like she had a place where she could belong. And as the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the ranch, she couldn't help but wonder if this might be the start of something new, something better. The days that followed felt like a blur to Sarah. It was as though time had slowed down out here on the ranch, each day blending into the next with a calmness she hadn't known in years. The rhythm of daily life, feeding the animals, working, in the garden helping Cole with small chores, gave her something to focus on, something to keep her mind from wandering back to the memories she was so desperate to escape. Still, in the quiet of the evening, as the sun began to set and the stars slowly appeared in the sky, Sarah often found herself staring out into the vast expanse of the land, lost in thought. It was easy to pretend she had left her past behind, but the truth was the past was always there, just beneath the surface, ready to surface whenever she least expected it. Cole noticed these moments of silence. He could see the struggle in her eyes, the way she would sometimes pull back as though she was afraid to let herself truly relax. He didn't push her, but he couldn't help but feel a growing sense of concern for her. She wasn't talking about what had happened to her before, and he understood that it would take time. But every now and then, he could see glimpses of the person she used to be, the person she could be again. He just wasn't sure how to help her find her way back. One evening, as they sat on the porch after dinner, the air cool and crisp, Cole leaned back in his chair, his boots propped up on the railing. The crickets chirped in the distance, and the world around them felt peaceful, untouched. He looked over at Sarah, who was sitting a few feet away, her hands resting on her knees as she stared out into the fading light. "Sarah," Cole began softly, his voice breaking the stillness. I know it's been hard, and I don't want to rush you into anything, but I want you to know that if you ever need to talk, I'm here. You don't have to carry all of this alone. Sarah didn't turn to look at him right away. Her gaze remained fixed on the horizon, as though she was searching for something in the distance. It was clear she hadn't expected him to say something like that. She had been so used to hiding her feelings, to pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. It was hard to imagine opening up to anyone, especially someone like Cole, who had been nothing but kind and patient with her. I don't know what to say, Sarah murmured after a long pause. Her voice was quiet, almost as if she was speaking more to herself than to Cole. I've never been good at talking about anything. Cole nodded, understanding her hesitation. He could see that she was wrestling with something inside, something that was difficult for her to face. He didn't want to force her into anything, but he knew that she couldn't keep bottling everything up forever. You don't have to talk if you don't want to, he said gently. But I want you to know that it's okay to lean on someone. It's okay to let go of some of that weight you're carrying. I'm not going to judge you. Sarah looked over at him, her eyes meeting his for the first time in what felt like forever. There was something in his gaze that made her feel safe, something that made her believe he meant every word. But even with that reassurance, it was still so hard to let go, to trust someone fully again. She had been hurt too many times before. I just feel so lost, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Like I'm trapped in this cycle, and I don't know how to break out of it. I can't even remember who I used to be before everything went wrong. Cole didn't rush to respond. He simply let her words hang in the air for a moment, giving her space to feel what she was feeling. He knew it wasn't easy for her to admit that. In fact, it was probably one of the hardest things she had ever said. Sometimes it's hard to know where to start, Cole said thoughtfully, but that doesn't mean it's impossible. Everyone has their own path, their own way of healing. You don't have to have it all figured out right now. Just take it one day at a time. Sarah bit her lip, feeling a mix of frustration and confusion. She appreciated his kindness, his understanding, but it was hard to believe that she could ever truly heal. The past had a way of clinging to her, and it seemed like no matter how far she ran, it was always there, haunting her. I don't know if I can do it, she confessed, her voice cracking slightly. I don't know if I can ever get past what's happened. I'm just broken. At her words, Cole stood up slowly, walking over to where she sat. He could see the pain in her eyes, the weight of the world on her shoulders. He knew she wasn't going to find the answers right away, but he also knew that she didn't have to face it alone. You're not broken, he said firmly, kneeling down in front of her. You're hurt, and that's okay. You're still whole. You're still worthy of love, of kindness, of peace. But it's going to take time, and that's okay too. Just know that I'm here no matter what. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she looked up at him, her eyes wide with surprise. She had never heard anyone speak to her like that before, so matter-of-fact, but also so full of understanding. It was hard for her to accept, but in that moment she realized that maybe, just maybe, she could believe him. Maybe she didn't have to carry all of her pain in silence. I don't know what to do, she whispered, her voice shaky. You don't have to know right now, Cole replied, his voice gentle but firm. One thing at a time. Maybe today you can just focus on getting through the day, and tomorrow you can do the same. And if you need me, I'm here. Just like this. No rush. For the first time in a long time, Sarah felt a small spark of hope flicker inside her. She didn't know if she could ever truly heal. But maybe with time, with patience, and with someone who cared, she could begin to move forward. She wasn't sure how to start, but maybe it didn't matter. Maybe she didn't need to have all the answers right away. Thank you, she said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. Cole smiled softly, standing up and offering her a hand. No need to thank me. I'm just doing what anyone would do. Just remember, you're not alone in this. Sarah looked at his outstretched hand, then back up at his face. For a moment she hesitated, unsure of whether she should take it. But then something inside her shifted. She reached out, taking his hand in hers. It wasn't much, but it was a start. It was a sign that maybe, just maybe, she could start to believe that things could get better. As they stood together on the porch, the sun finally dipped below the horizon, casting the ranch in a soft, golden light. For Sarah, it felt like a new beginning. A quiet, uncertain step forward into something that might not be so dark after all. It was the kind of morning when the whole world seemed to pause and breathe in the quiet. The ranch was still, and the only sound was the occasional chirp of a bird or the rustling of leaves in the soft breeze. Sarah had gotten used to the stillness here. After the chaos of her past, the calm was almost unsettling, but in a good way. She had been staying at Cole's ranch for several weeks now, and although she didn't always speak much, she felt a growing sense of comfort in the routine. There was always work to do, but it wasn't overwhelming. It felt manageable. For the first time in years, Sarah didn't feel like she was running or hiding. She was simply existing in a space where the past hadn't yet caught up with her. That morning, after a quiet breakfast, Cole had gone out to check on the cattle, leaving Sarah with some time to herself. She had spent the last few days working on the garden, but today, she didn't feel like doing anything. She felt restless. There was a restlessness inside her that she couldn't ignore anymore. Her mind kept wandering back to her past, back to the memories that had made her feel so filthy, so broken. Sitting in the kitchen, she stared at the empty table, lost in thought. She thought about how much had changed since she arrived here. At the same time, though, she couldn't shake the feeling that something inside her was still undone, something she wasn't yet ready to face. The old wounds were still there, hidden beneath the surface, and no amount of peaceful mornings or quiet afternoons could change that. As she sat there, her fingers tracing patterns on the table, a thought crossed her mind. What if I'm not really healed? What if I'm just pretending to be okay? She stood up, feeling the need to do something, anything, to escape the thoughts that were swirling around her. Her legs carried her to the small room she had been staying in, and she stood at the doorway for a moment, unsure of what to do next. Her eyes landed on the small bed, neatly made, with the quilt that Cole's grandmother had sewn lying across it. There was something comforting about the simple patterns on the quilt, but it didn't stop the growing discomfort that sat heavy in her chest. She looked over at the dresser, where she kept the few clothes she had. She hadn't brought much with her when she arrived at the ranch, only the clothes she had been wearing and a small bag with a few personal items. It didn't matter much to her. The past seemed so far away now, and yet it still lingered, hanging over her like a shadow. Suddenly her eyes caught something. In the corner of the room, half hidden beneath the bed, was a small worn-out blanket. She bent down to pick it up, her curiosity piqued. As she unfolded it, she realized it wasn't a blanket at all, but something else entirely. It was an old frayed journal. Her heart skipped a beat. It was her journal, her old journal. She had forgotten it even existed. She must have tossed it in the corner of the room when she arrived, trying to bury the past and all the painful memories that came with it. She had never intended to look at it again. But now, as the worn pages of the journal slipped through her fingers, a strange mix of emotions flooded over her. Part of her wanted to toss it aside, to forget it ever existed, but another part of her, some deeper part of her, knew that she couldn't just leave it behind. She couldn't ignore the history it held, no matter how painful it might be. With a hesitant breath, Sarah opened the journal to the first page. The handwriting was familiar, her own. She could almost hear the voice in her head that had written those words long ago, full of raw emotion and confusion. The pages were filled with fragments of her life, moments she had tried to forget but had somehow put down in ink. There were no perfect sentences, no neat endings, just messy, real thoughts of someone who had been lost, someone who had been struggling to survive. As Sarah flipped through the pages, the memories began to flood back. She remembered the days when she had written in this journal, when it had been her only outlet for the emotions that she had bottled up inside. The anger, the fear, the sadness, all of it was here, raw and unfiltered. But there was something else too. As she kept reading, she started to notice something she hadn't realized before. Despite all the pain, there were small moments of hope scattered throughout the journal. A line here, a thought there that suggested that even in her darkest moments, she hadn't completely given up. Tears pricked at the back of her eyes, but she quickly wiped them away. She wasn't ready to cry. She didn't want to cry. Not now, not after all the time she had spent convincing herself that she was done with all of it. But as she kept reading, something shifted. She remembered how she used to believe that this journal was her way of finding peace, her way of making sense of the world around her. Now, as she read through her own words, it felt like she was reconnecting with a part of herself that she had buried for far too long. It was almost as if the journal was telling her that healing wasn't going to happen all at once. It wasn't going to be a single defining moment where everything magically fell into place. Healing, it seemed, was something that took time, something that required patience, and maybe, just maybe, it was okay to feel broken for a while. Before she could stop herself, Sarah found herself standing up and walking toward the door. She didn't know why, but she felt compelled to show Cole the journal. Maybe it was because he had become someone she trusted, someone she could open up to even if she didn't have all the answers. She didn't want to carry this burden alone anymore. She stepped out into the bright afternoon sunlight, the journal clutched tightly in her hands. She knew she wasn't ready to tell Cole everything, not yet. But she also knew that she couldn't keep hiding from her own story. Maybe showing him this part of herself would be the first real step toward healing. As she walked down the porch, she spotted Cole in the distance, walking toward the barn. He looked up as he noticed her approach, his expression softening when he saw the look on her face. "Is everything okay?" Cole asked, his voice filled with concern. Sarah stood in front of him, the journal still in her hands. She swallowed hard, her heart pounding in her chest. "I found something," she said, her voice trembling. "Something I think I need to share with you." Cole didn't say anything at first. He simply waited, letting her find the words she needed. After a long silence, Sarah handed him the journal. He looked down at it, and for a moment his face remained unreadable. It's mine," Sarah said quietly. "It's part of my past, and I don't know if I'm ready to face it all yet, but I think I need to. I think I need to stop pretending like it didn't happen." Cole nodded slowly, a quiet understanding in his eyes. He reached out, gently taking the journal from her hands. "You don't have to face it all at once, Sarah," he said softly. "But if this is something you want to share, I'm here." And in that moment, as Sarah looked at the journal in his hands, she realized that maybe, just maybe, it was time to start letting go of the fear. It wasn't about forgetting the past, but rather accepting it and learning to move forward one step at a time. The days that followed were filled with a quiet rhythm. Sarah wasn't sure when exactly things began to change, but it felt like each passing day was a small step forward. She had always been the kind of person who took everything on her own shoulders, never letting anyone else see her struggles. But here, on Cole's ranch, she started to learn that it was okay to ask for help, even if it was just by letting someone sit with her in silence. It wasn't an easy journey, and it didn't happen overnight. Healing never does. There were days when Sarah woke up with a heaviness in her chest, a reminder that the past hadn't completely let go of her. But there were also moments when she felt lighter, when the world seemed a little more open, a little less overwhelming. One morning, as Sarah sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, Cole entered with his usual quiet energy. He had a way about him that made her feel grounded, like the chaos in her mind could finally settle when he was near. His presence was steady, dependable, and that was something Sarah hadn't realized she needed until now. "Morning," he said as he poured himself a cup of coffee and sat across from her. "Morning," Sarah replied, her voice still soft but warmer than it had been in the past. She had begun to let her guard down, even if just a little. It felt like a victory to speak without fear, to respond without hesitation. For the first time, Sarah found herself looking at Cole not just as someone who had helped her, but as someone who had become a true friend. She trusted him, and that trust was something she had been afraid to give to anyone for a long time. She hadn't even fully realized how closed off she had been until now. Being here with him in this peaceful place had given her the chance to rebuild parts of herself that she had buried deep inside. Cole set his cup down and leaned back in his chair, his eyes meeting hers with a calm intensity. "How are you doing today?" he asked. It was a simple question, but Sarah knew it came from a place of genuine care. She took a deep breath, looking out the window where the sun was beginning to rise, painting the sky with shades of pink and orange. I'm getting there," she said slowly. "It's not easy, but I'm starting to feel like maybe it's possible. Like I can actually be okay again." Cole nodded, his gaze softening. "You're doing better than you realize." Some days it's just about taking it one step at a time, not rushing to get to the finish line. It's okay to just be where you are. Sarah thought about that. In the past, she had always pushed herself to be better, to be stronger, to get past the pain as quickly as possible. She hadn't allowed herself the time to heal properly. But now, for the first time, she understood that it was okay to take it slow. Healing wasn't a race. It was a process, and she had to honor that. She smiled, feeling a small warmth inside her chest. I've been trying to be kinder to myself. I think that's what I've been missing all along. Cole gave a small smile in return. Kindness is the most important thing you can give yourself right now. You've been through a lot, Sarah, don't forget that. The conversation moved on, but for Sarah it was a turning point. She wasn't just talking about healing anymore, she was living it. The past few weeks had taught her that she didn't have to be alone in her pain, and she didn't have to rush through the process of finding herself again. She could take her time, ask for help, and accept that some days would be harder than others. As the days passed, Sarah found herself becoming more involved in the life of the ranch. She continued to help with the animals in the garden, but she also started taking small steps outside of her usual routine. One afternoon, she decided to go for a walk along the fields behind the house. It was something she had been avoiding before, something she had feared because it reminded her of how far she had come and how much of her life had been shaped by pain. But today she felt something different. Hope. The walk was peaceful. The fields stretched out in front of her, dotted with wildflowers and tall grass that swayed in the breeze. She stopped to take in the view, feeling the sun on her face and the earth beneath her feet. It was a simple moment, but it was enough to make her feel like she was truly part of something again. Like she had a place in this world. As Sarah stood there, breathing in the fresh air, she realized something important. She didn't have to have all the answers. She didn't have to know exactly what her future looked like. What mattered was that she was moving forward. She was healing, one small step at a time. That evening, as the sun set and the sky turned a brilliant shade of red, Sarah sat on the porch with Cole, the quiet hum of the ranch around them. She had never been good at expressing her feelings, but tonight, she felt like it was the right time to say something. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady but full of emotion. "For everything. For being here. For helping me get through all of it." Cole turned to look at her, his face softening with the familiar kindness she had come to rely on. "You don't have to thank me. I'm just doing what anyone would do. But you should thank yourself. You're the one who's been so strong. I just gave you the space to breathe." Sarah smiled, feeling something light inside her. She had been afraid of so many things. The past, the unknown, the pain. But now she realized that she didn't have to be afraid of her own strength. She had come this far, and even though the journey wasn't over, she was proud of herself. She was finally beginning to believe that she could heal, that she could start over. And it was all happening in its own time. The next few weeks were filled with more small steps forward. Sarah continued to help on the ranch, but she also began to make plans for the future. She thought about possibly finding a new job, or even taking up a hobby she had once enjoyed. The idea of starting something new didn't feel as overwhelming anymore. It felt possible. One day, when the weather was particularly warm, Sarah took the time to sit down with the journal she had found weeks ago. It had been a part of her past, a painful reminder of everything she had gone through. But now, as she read through the pages once more, she saw something different. She saw the woman who had survived, the woman who had fought for a better life even when it felt impossible, the woman who was still here, still standing, and still learning how to live again. As she closed the journal, Sarah felt a sense of peace. It wasn't a perfect ending, but it was a beginning, and that, she realized, was all she needed. "You're not alone in this." Cole's words echoed in her mind, reminding her that she didn't have to do everything by herself. She had a future ahead of her, and it was bright. The past no longer defined her, and though the road ahead would be full of challenges, she knew she was ready to face them. For the first time in a long time, Sarah felt like she could finally take a deep breath and embrace the possibility of what was to come. The future was uncertain, but it was hers to shape, and that thought filled her with hope.